All right, I'm excited, everybody. Let's kick off this 2024 West Virginia University football season officially with it being Big 12 Media Days. The two-day event in Las Vegas, Nevada concluded earlier this afternoon, and we got to hear from the head ball coach, Neal Brown himself, some players, college football 25, EA Sports new video game, the WVU media members themselves kind of all being involved, flocking to Las Vegas to create content, having a press conference, interview segments, so on and so forth. The commissioner, Brett Yormark himself, spoke yesterday and had some big things to say. But because this video or in this channel is specifically about West Virginia, I won't really necessarily get into the things that were said by Brett Yormark or some comments that were made by head ball coach Mike Gundy of Oklahoma State that kind of got him on hot water regarding Ollie Gordon. I'll save that for others. You can take a look back through social media and other websites on what exactly was said on behalf of the conference and the other teams. But today we're just going to specifically focus on West Virginia, and we'll talk about Neal Brown's press conference segment, his introductory words and some back and forth that he had with some media members, Garrett Greene getting a quick segment on ESPN, the Big 12 preseason poll released last week. We're going to talk about where West Virginia is slotted in that poll and talk about some of the other teams involved. Is West Virginia too low, or is it just right for just about everybody? We're going to talk about the preseason all Big 12 team just quickly and only one player being represented on it. And then, of course, the most important thing I feel like to come out of all of Media Day for West Virginia specifically is we finally get from the program itself a preseason depth chart to review. And if you've followed this channel since the end of 2023, we've talked about transfer portal recruiting. We talked about high school recruiting. We talked about off-season conditioning and training. We talked about the spring game and everything that went on with that, what feels like forever ago, but was really just only a few months ago in April. So now we can finally talk about, on paper at least, of where Neal Brown and the program itself sees these players for whenever the first 11s jump onto the field at Milan Puskar Stadium on August 31st against Penn State. Who will we be seeing where, and how will they be involved? So that's all I'm going to talk about for today's show. Love to have your feedback here. If you like this video by the end of it, please hit that like button. Love to have your comments. Love to have some back and forth with you fans. That's why I do this. And love to have you as a subscriber for the channel, closing in on about 300 subscribers for the last calendar year that I've created this channel. So if you've been here for the last 365, I hope to make the next 365 as good as possible for you. I have a lot of fun doing this and engaging with fans. So and I'd like to hear your feedback. I'd like to hear your comments. Yes, I'd love to have highlight videos and do some more things like that. So you never know where this channel might take you, but if it takes having more subscribers, more views on videos, things of that nature. So let's talk first about Big 12 Media Day. Sorry, still just barely fighting in the back half of this summer cold that I'm facing right now. But Big 12 Media Day, in and of itself, the format for it, I just feel like is a little bit, with now 16 teams involved in the conference, it's a little much. And trying to fit so many coaches in and quick segments, it's really just creating content for ESPN to show on daytime television. I like the premise of media days and having a public forum for these coaches and some of the top players to be all in one setting and do some fun stuff and make some social media videos and things like that. But really, beyond just talking about what many hardcore fans like myself, and if you're a hardcore fan tuning into this video, already kind of know. So what I'm going to try and pull is some of the nuggets necessarily that I took from some of the things that were said. So if you want to go back and you want to watch Neal or listen to Neal Brown's full press conference, and some of the exact words that he said, read some of the other articles out there. The guys over at Sports Illustrated, Mountaineers Now, have done a great job so far in this last day of creating some articles to talk about those things. So what I would say about Neal Brown's press conference, it wasn't Mike Leach fast, but it seemed very fast. 2 minutes, just really a Reader's Digest version of a recap of 2023 and what West Virginia brings to the table in 2024. Now, Neal Brown didn't necessarily go scorched earth like I was hoping he did last night. If you tuned into my video about high school class of 2025 recruiting that I just published this morning, I was hoping, going into today that he was going to potentially go scorched earth. But he did, reiterating that West Virginia is an underdog. And he gets that by the vibe by national and Big 12 media. West Virginia being overlooked in the national top 25 poll, being picked where it is in the Big 12 poll, individual players not necessarily getting the recognition that he thinks that they deserve. And what I just have to say with this is I don't think it's necessarily making excuses, but as Neal Brown and everyone else found out in 2023 is you just have to win, baby. Just win. Just go out there and prove people wrong. That the Big 12 media does not care, and national media too. And I'm watching this at work today on my phone during this segment, of Neal Brown sitting down with Andre Ware, Chris Budden, Brock Osweiler. And the first thing that comes up for the 2023 recap graphic shows West Virginia's record for 2022. So what the cue the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme music introduction to Neal Brown in West Virginia by not recognizing in that graphic the 9-4 record that they had, Duke's Mayo Bowl champions and things of that nature. So what I just have to say, and I'll continue this a theme I have for many years. If you read some of my articles over at WVNation.com years ago, and what I've said on this channel many a times is that West Virginia has to be a disruptor. It has to cut against the grain. It has to carve its own path. It does not have the benefit of the doubt that the program had in the transitory years from Rich Rodriguez to the Bill Stewart era in the Big East, and they were still getting a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt, getting some national rankings when they didn't necessarily deserve it in, say, 2008 to 2010 at times. And I kind of chronicled that a little bit in my video last week about the ranking the quarterbacks of the last 20 years. But that's ultimately the theme that I have from this entire day, is that it's Groundhog Day all over again. Not as bad as 2023, but 2024 seemed much of the same, and that there are just doubters galore, especially from this Big 12 media crew, about Neal Brown and West Virginia, and not giving them the recognition that he thinks they deserve. So, and I loved the dig that he had to throw in there at the end about, I'm thankful for you all for asking me a few more questions than I got this past year, and actually giving me an opportunity to respond, because if you recall at Big 12 Media Day last year, I think he only got one question after he had his introductory statements. Big 12 media pretty much counting on West Virginia to lose to Pitt in the backyard brawl, and he would have got the axe, early on in the season. So what also I would say, in addition to what I'm going to talk about in a little bit later when we talk in terms of the depth chart, in the interview with Chris Budden and Andre Ware and Brock Osweiler after the fact, talking about West Virginia's need to be good in the trenches acknowledging you have to have, good skill position players, a mobile quarterback most notably, and how West Virginia's changed its entire outlook of recruiting and development for a mobile quarterback who can scramble, but also having the need to be good in the trenches. And where I don't think West Virginia, from a roster management perspective, addressed that post spring game. I thought it was very interesting that he said that the wide receivers are going to surprise some people this year. Most notably, Jaden Bray, a reporter from Stillwater, Oklahoma, asked him a question specifically about Bray, and it sounds to me like West Virginia or Neal Brown has a lot of faith in Jaden Bray to be one of the upper class leaders for this program, not only in 2024 but 2025 with another year of eligibility to play. So, really big on Jaden Bray. And then also talking about the linebackers, thinking that they're not right now, but think we'll get talked about a lot more as the season goes along. Josiah Trotter, Ben Cutter, Trey Lathan, most notably, and how that West Virginia really utilized the transfer portal to bring in defensive backs. And I've talked about that, how I think they've brought in 5 or 6 corners already for this position with the graduation of Malachi Ruffin and Beanie Bishop this past offseason. Still, unfortunately, West Virginia is digging itself out of the hole that it had going into the 2022 season when Jackie Matthews, Daryl Porter, and I forget the guy who ended up going to UTEP, Nick Troy Fortune, left the program all in one offseason, really leaving West Virginia with a hole of having to backfill for 2022, 23, and now 24 with a whole bunch of transfer portal guys at the cornerback position. So that's all I have to say about Neal Brown's really press conference and what he had to say there. Garrett Greene's interview, I thought what was very generalized as well, some softball questions. He talked about and everything that Mountaineer fans have talked about, Brown's reiterated throughout the offseason, and Greene becoming a more consistent passer. And he said he and Tyler Allen and the other coaches really took a look at his footwork about getting himself settled, and I agree with this. And you saw that develop over the back half of the 2023 season when Greene wouldn't rush himself, set his feet, deliver an accurate ball with some touch, and you saw him develop some rapport, especially with Hudson Clement, I feel like, over the back half of the season. Cole Taylor, Jaheim White, I remember that awesome catch in the Cincinnati game. Then, of course, the home run hitter against Baylor. And then, of course, Traylon Ray in that Baylor game, as well as the Duke's Mayo Bowl first play. I think Garrett Greene has a huge goal for himself in a 65% completion percentage. It's very timely with me having the video last week about the quarterbacks of the last 20 years. Went back and looked through my notes from that show, and Clint Trickett and Will Grier had a 67% completion percentage in 2014 and 2018 respectively. So Greene has his hopes set very high to be one of those top 5 quarterbacks of the last 20 years in Mountaineer football history, with the dynamics that he adds to the run game. So high hopes for Garrett Greene, high hopes for this team with Neal Brown. In the interviews that they had with ESPN, didn't necessarily catch any other radio interviews that he did, or haven't watched a whole bit of social media content that maybe WVU Sports has produced so far today. But that's what I take away. If there was anything else that you took away, I'd love to hear your comments. But that was really what I took away from that segment. Now let's talk about the preseason poll, which again released last week and had many fans of Twitter on X, formerly known as Twitter. And here's where I'll weigh in on this preseason poll. I think there's a bit of a difference in how these voters necessarily are picking these teams, necessarily where they think they'll finish, and what I would conclude for what's most applicable for a preseason poll of really power rankings. The talent of your roster, coaching prestige, how you've done in recent years. Really, I would say like last year going into this year. And I think that's where things might get a little bit skewed with this poll. What I'll say is I do think there are some tiers, and I talked about this last year, and this is where I'm going to go again with this segment. And using my good old Lindy's magazine and my research that I did over the course of the month of June on a couple of vacations, the tiers that I see as tier 1, 3 teams that at least right now on paper that I could say is, if you had a gun to my head and said pick a Big 12 champion, I'm going of one of these 3 teams. Oklahoma State number 1, Kansas State number 2, and Utah number 3. Utah had the most number 1 votes. And where I will say I just don't get it necessarily is that was an 8-5 team last year whose 4 of their 8 wins were won by 7 points or fewer. I know that Cam Rising was out, and Cam Rising was sensational the year before. He was the straw that stirred the drink for the Utes. And by losing him, also Brant Kuthi at tight end, who didn't play last year, they were without some dogs. But as the old adage is saying, when you're thinking about retirement, you're already retired. And it's just kind of weird to me, I feel like, that Kyle Whittingham named a coach in waiting on his staff. And so I just wonder, with kind of some of these things, not necessarily in flux with the Utah program, but, first year into the Big 12, getting the benefit of the doubt that teams like TCU and West Virginia did not get whenever they joined the conference almost a dozen years ago. Last year, the 4 newcomers not getting that kind of... I just wonder, was there sort of special preferential treatment for the Utes in this preseason poll? Because, say what you want. I mean, in 2016, Will Grier missed out on an entire season, comes into 2017 and doesn't miss a beat, and plays, like an all-conference caliber player. So who's to say that Cam Rising, missing an entire season's worth of football, he can't pick up right where he just left off? I think he's that high caliber of a player. I think he fits that system perfectly. And Utah's tough. They're physical. Not going to argue that point. But so is Kansas State, and so is Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State has all of these returners. I mean, practically, I think their entire offensive line. Of course, the Doak Walker Award winner in Ollie Gordon. Their top 2 receiving targets. Defensively, the top 2 linebackers in the conference. And Gundy's always a defensive-minded coach who can play offense fast. And how they got the benefit of the doubt from the NCAA to grant Alan Bowman at quarterback like 7th or 8th season is ridiculous to me. He's not going to set the world on fire, and like the numbers last year, with 14, 15 interceptions, absolutely prove it. But Oklahoma State beat Oklahoma, and like they bounced back from an embarrassing loss against South Alabama and really took it to the rest of the Big 12 conference once they, got Bowman like settled into the system and could figure it out. So I would take Oklahoma State, and K-State's right there. The way they performed in that Pop-Tarts Bowl against NC State, I think they've upgraded at quarterback. I was never a Will Howard believer. Ever since, in all of his matchups against West Virginia, Will Howard was the one guy who you could count on to make a mistake and turn the ball over some way, somehow, and he just necessarily... I don't know. Similarly, in the way of Skylar Howard, I feel like he almost had a ceiling of what he could do for you. So by turning to Avery Johnson, I loved what I saw out of him in that Pop-Tarts Bowl. K-State's going to be a tough out. They're always tough. Chris Kleiman has developed like a perfect brand identity, I feel like, for Kansas State. They're recruiting better. They have a great JUCO pipeline. They have great offensive linemen, it always seems like. So right then and there, I think between Oklahoma State, K-State, and Utah, take your pick. But out of this next tier, which includes West Virginia, I can see any of these 7 teams winning the conference. Number 4, I'm okay with Kansas being there. 9-win team from a year ago that predominantly won without its all-conference player of the year going in preseason last year in quarterback Jalen Daniels. Devin Neal, incredible running back, one of the best in college football. And they have their entire receiving core that ate West Virginia up 2 years ago at home in Morgantown back. They have two awesome cornerbacks who are on the all Big 12 first team. And they just play fast. Now, the impact of Kotelnicki going to Penn State as their new offensive coordinator, we'll have to see how that affects Kansas. I'd almost, because of, you never know the health situation of Jalen Daniels, I don't know whether it'd be better to play Kansas at the beginning of the year versus at the end of the year. But, West Virginia, when it's played Kansas at the end of the year, it had some close calls there. Especially under Lance Leipold here. But, at the beginning of the year, two years ago, we saw how that worked out, going into overtime and losing that game. But I like Kansas, and I think that's going to be an awesome, electric offensive game September 21st in Morgantown. That's going to be a show for sure. And same with where Arizona's slated. Noah Fafita coming onto the scene, getting them to 10 wins. Now, the only question is, was that really a one-hit wonder? Was that a TCU of 2022? Tedoroic McMillan might be the best wide receiver in college football. And you have going to be probably a first or second rounder at left tackle on your offensive line. So if you have, some semblance of, a line who can protect your blind side, a great quarterback and a great wide receiver, you can win some games, even if you're a newcomer into this league. And by keeping Takario Davis on the opposite side of the ball, even though they lost their head coach in Jed Fish, I think Arizona's still going to be a team that can contend. But I think they could go one of two ways. We'll see if they can keep that continuity together, keep that same momentum going that they had to end the season despite losing their head coach. Where I'll take some umbrage here is I would put West Virginia ahead of Iowa State at 7. And where I don't understand this argument about Iowa State is they were a 7-6 program last year. Their only big win was against Kansas State in a game that was, Farmageddon in a snow globe. If you remember watching that game on TV, it was just a snowstorm. And they somehow came away with a victory in that one. Got blown out, blitzed against Memphis in the Liberty Bowl. I went back and watched those highlights just to prepare for this show a week ago, and that was what felt like uncompetitive game, that Memphis just took it to them early, stepped on their throat, and held them down. And so, what is all this momentum for and love for Iowa State that you're not going to give to West Virginia? If you want to knock them, as I've been critical over this offseason and recapping that 2023 season with no ranked wins, and the times that you did play 3 ranked opponents, you lost by double digits. So I can hear that argument. But, or if it's just more so that Iowa State was after Hunter Deckers and their running back, whose name escapes me at the top of the moment, were kicked off the team right before the season started because of gambling. And so their season looked to be in turmoil before even week 1, that they finally picked it up. Rocco Beck seems to be a really nice heir apparent to Brock Purdy in this next transition into his legacy at Iowa State. I'm still happy that West Virginia went with Nico Marchiol and sticking by my guns with that of not choosing to go after Rocco Becht and losing Nico Marchiol. I'm happy to have him as a quarterback. But at the same time, I can recognize game where there is game, and seems like in his first real full year as starter for Iowa State that he's going to be competitive and he's going to keep them in a lot of close games. So I would put West Virginia 6th. I would have Iowa State next, or the team that I'm about to talk about is UCF, that they still have a lot of offensive firepower, namely at R.J. Harvey at running back. K.J. Jefferson, I feel like is damaged goods, but played behind a horrendous Arkansas team that really just fell flat. Lost to BYU last year. That BYU team was bad. So being picked as the new league newcomer, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid and buying on KJ Jefferson for the Golden Knights. But I think if they can figure out some pieces defensively, that was the Achilles heel of UCF last year. They had some offensive firepower. Gus Malzahn, one of the most creative offensive minds in college football, and UCF will score points again. But how big of strides are they going to make on the defensive side of the ball? Are some of these 9 4-stars that they got in their high school 2024 class going to start as true freshmen? I think UCF is at least a year away. And then you're looking at who's the next quarterback for them. So in this next tier that I'll call Tier 3, I got UCF, I got Texas Tech, I have TCU, and I have Colorado. Texas Tech, got to figure out your defense, y'all. Got to figure out your defense. I think Baron Morton didn't have the kind of season that many were expecting out of him, of how well that he played in the back half of the 2022 season. But still have Taj Brooks, brought in a 5-star wide receiver who's going to start. The Red Raiders can surprise some folks, but I don't think they're necessarily conference championship caliber worthy. TCU fell back down to earth in 2023 as a lot of people expected. This is a judgment on how good of a head coach and leader of a program, developer of a program that Sonny Dykes is. And we'll have to see what TCU does to rebound. Was 2022 a fluke? Did all stars align with all of the star power that it had at some skill positions, and Max Duggan just had the year of his life? And then there's Colorado. I mean, I don't know what EA College Sports 25 is thinking with picking them 16th in the country, but pretty clearly the people who picked this preseason poll know their stuff. I just don't understand, even with the stars that you have in Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, that you can siphon out half your team to the transfer portal, add half a team back through a transfer portal, pretty much coerced just because of the aura of Deion Sanders, and they're spending like sailors on NIL money, if that's going to win you a conference championship. But can Colorado surprise some people if they can put together an offensive line? Maybe. But I just don't see them contending with the likes of the teams in the top 7. Excuse me. Getting this stupid cold. So then next tier, Tier 4, is some teams that really just want to be mid. I feel like to save some coaching, get some coaches off the hot seat. Number 1 being Dave Aranda, who might be number 1, top 3, I would say, in college football of coaches on the hot seat. Unfortunately, I think Dave Aranda is a great defensive mind, was an outstanding defensive coordinator at LSU, but just hasn't necessarily, taken the torch from Matt Rule and, for one, figured out the quarterback position, although they are bringing in Daquan Finn, who led Toledo to being a team that flirted with the national top 25 rankings by the end of the season last year. I like their running back, who ran back 2 kicks against West Virginia. You can recall in that season finale a year ago. Richard Reese, that's what I thought his name was. Didn't want to misspeak on that one. But defensively, they were a mess last season. I mean, had 8 or 9. I think they had 8 home games last year, and to finish where they finished, I mean, I don't know how Aranda saved his job unless they just didn't want to, completely start over. With a brand new stadium. So Baylor, this is a big year for Baylor. I feel like having to make a bowl game or Aranda's gone. Similarly, BYU and Kalani Sitake, that they were a mess, couldn't run the ball whatsoever, which is incredible for BYU. Given, and I think they had Kingsley Sua-Matea, who went in the NFL draft, and just they could not run the ball whatsoever, turning away from Keaton Slovis for that West Virginia matchup and got run out of town in that one. So I think BYU is trying to have turn a new page, and same with Cincinnati. That we figured of all of the teams coming into the Big 12 this past year, that Cincinnati was probably the team that was going to be starting from the bottom, with brand new head coach and Scott Satterfield taking over from Luke Fickell, who goes to Wisconsin, and they didn't have the kind of talent necessary to compete with the other likes in the Big 12. Now they're replacing a quarterback. I'll be surprised if Cincinnati can get to 5 wins. Can they beat Pitt week 2? That'll be an interesting one. And then in Tier 5, Houston and ASU. I'm not even going to take the time to necessarily talk about them. But for the most part, I think the Big 12 poll is pretty darn near close. If I was a voter, I wouldn't have Utah 1. I wouldn't have Iowa State 6. So I would bump West Virginia up over them. But for the rest of it, I'm pretty good with. So very close, I would say. But just were the voters trying to predict based upon how these teams would finish, or necessarily the power rankings, which is the way that I would do it with talent and coaching pedigree. So talking about the all Big 12 team, the only West Virginia player that was represented was Wyatt Milam on the offensive line. If he wasn't, I would have thought that this list was legit, being one of the best offensive or left tackles specifically in the country. The places where you would like to see some of West Virginia's talented players, Garrett Greene, Jaheim White, C.J. Donaldson. There's just so many good quarterbacks and running backs in this league. So you figured that they would go, Taj Brooks, who ran for 1,500 yards, as well as Ollie Gordon at running back, and then at quarterback, really take your pick. And with the numbers and, marketability, whatever you want to call it, star power of Shedeur Sanders, kind of figured that that's where the league was going to go for that pick. But can you make an argument for Garrett Greene in there? Absolutely. I think the argument strongest is for Cole Taylor at tight end, leading the team in receptions this past year, being a big red zone target. Brant Kuithe from Utah, who did not play in 2023. He's a seventh-year senior, so that just goes to show that we live in a bonkers world of college football, that 7th and 8th-year seniors are still in here. Get a job. And even in 2022, Kuithe, 19 receptions for 206 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now in 2021, he had 50 receptions for 611 yards and 6 touchdowns. But guys, it's 2024. It's not 2021 with Jarret Doege at quarterback. Like, how far away does that seem like? I also think you could have made an argument for Michael Hayes at kicker, Ollie Straw at punter. If you look back at some of my game recap videos from this past season and chronicling how special teams played a part in West Virginia's season last year, Ollie Straw had a heck of a year punting the ball. Michael Hayes was legit, just had, I think, 3 missed kicks all season, 3 or 4. So they definitely, I feel like, could have had an argument. But there was just a lot of talent, I feel like, along the defensive line for a guy like a Sean Martin to break in, or an Aubrey Burks to break in the defensive backs. With both of those players having arguably, down years potentially by their standards or expectations of what they were supposed to have in 2023. So not on the all Big 12 football team preseason, but I would say both Martin and Burks players to watch by the end of season. And at linebacker, there's just not enough necessarily just yet on any of the linebackers, with Josiah Trotter, Trey Lathan, and Tyron Bradley being the projected starters, which presents for a great transition, and I hope you have stayed this long on this video, now almost 34 minutes in. We got the depth chart, people. We got the depth chart, and oh my goodness, do I have some thoughts for you. I'm going to break it down for you, position group by position group. I might go quicker on some ones where, like we said, all off season, definitely into the spring game. A lot of the ones were already settled. So starting it off with quarterback, we know Garrett Greene's going to be the starter. Nico Marchiol will be the backup. Running back, same difference. I think the most interesting question will be how will the carries be divided, if you want to call it. I don't think there's necessarily a snap count. I don't think there's necessarily like target numbers, but the management of carries between Garrett Greene, CJ Donaldson, and Jaheim White, I feel like will be very important for Neal Brown to manage. And Garrett Greene's going to do a lot of improvisation. Guaranteed. I know he even, speaks a big game about, wanting to increase his completion percentage and wants to prove that he can be a thrower for 2024. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and lead with your strengths. I'm a huge proponent and believer in that in all facets of life. His strength is running the ball. So if that means him carrying the ball 70 times like he did this past season, do it. CJ Donaldson would love to see a 60-40 split with Jaheim White. In the same way that Warren and Harris for the Steelers, have their split carries, and people always argue that Warren should get more carries than Najee Harris. If you're a Steelers fan, I think the way that West Virginia split the carries between C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White to keep both fresh when they needed to is going to be vitally important for 2024. So that's where I'll pause there. We kind of know Jalen Anderson will probably be the third back into the fold, and then maybe one of the two true freshmen. But probably are both going to be suited for a red shirt. Tight end, we get it. Cole Taylor will be predominantly the receiving tight end. Traylon Davis, the blocking tight end. I'd love to see Davis get involved potentially more in the passing game if he can develop soft hands. But that's where we go with those two. At wide receiver gets very interesting, but I think all of the players that I've talked about all offseason are in these like top 6, top 8. And that is Rodney Gallagher, Day Farmer getting the first crack as the true freshman out of this fall 24 class to being involved, second behind Gallagher at the H wide receiver position. Either Jaden Bray or Hudson Clement at the X, Preston Fox or Traylon Ray at the Z. So it's really going to depend upon, play design, where West Virginia's out on the field, what they're trying to do. Those 6 receivers, I feel like are going to get really the first crack at it. And then Justin Robinson, who they added late in the portal, is really, I feel like, a red zone threat. At his size, vertical leap ability, getting involved, see how he does in fall camp, and see how he gets involved early, maybe making more of a splash later on in the second half of the season, or second 2/3. But I still just don't understand his addition to the program. When I'm not going to hold my thoughts when we talk about the defense. So across the offensive line, also pretty much understood. The only place that I talked about preseason, during the spring, that I thought there could be any potential competition was at right tackle. And we see, as I said, Nick Malone's going to get the first crack at it. Out of camp, see how this offensive line gels. He was, I think, out during spring camp. I think there were a few starters. Tomas Remak also out at times during spring camp. So pretty set at Wyatt Milum at left tackle, Tomas Remak on that left side. Big year for Brandon Yates by his own admission. This is his legacy year to prove it at center. Following in the footsteps of Zach Frazier, Jaquay Hubbard, also a sixth-year senior, and then Malone, a sixth-year senior. So does Bosley compete for starting snaps? Yet to be determined during fall camp. But if you're asking me who's trotting out there at right tackle against Penn State first series, it's going to be Nick Malone. That's where I'm hedging my bets based on past experiences with Neal Brown and how he gets stuck to players and wants to give them all benefit of the doubt until finally the dam breaks for something and he moves on to somebody else. So that's your offense. Pretty well understood. We'll see how the receptions are really distributed, the carries are distributed, but there's a lot of options. This offense can be very dynamic. Just going to depend upon how good this offensive line is and not taking major steps backwards with Doug Nestor graduating and Zach Frazier now in the NFL is, can the middle to right side step up? Guys who are all 23 years old or older, perhaps, I don't know their ages off, but sixth year seniors go out there and bust some heads. Now let's go to the defensive side of the ball where this gets interesting. As expected, I feel like on both ends of the 3-3-5 scheme that's now published in Lindy's, now by West Virginia themselves, at the two defensive end positions, not a 3-4 base defense, is Sean Martin on one side. Get that. TJ Jackson, I feel like, will definitely rotate in. And then Eddie Vesterinen, who had a really great overproducing than what was expected 2023 season, with Asani Redwood behind him, who missed all of spring practice. At nose tackle, it'll be a rotation between Fatorma Mulba and Hammond Russell, who, Mike Lockhart got a majority of the snaps at nose tackle, Mulba coming in certain situations, and then toward the end of the year, Russell got in, a few here and there. Is that a caliber? Did you need to go out? Does West Virginia need to go out there and get another nose tackle? Yes, because I'm not seeing Corey McIntyre on this list, who Neal Brown has talked about ad nauseum since signing day over, a year ago for him. Apparently, according to some of the burners on Twitter, tore his ACL in spring practice. I don't see him on this list. That tells me he's not going to be playing this year. Done for a medical redshirt. And then Nate Gabriel, who's a true freshman. So why, oh why, did you go and get a 7th string wide receiver and use that scholarship and NIL money that way? Or Ryder Burton, who is an insurance policy behind Garrett Greene and Nico Marchiol at quarterback. And then there was one other offensive piece. And Greg Genross, who is not one of your top 2 tight end options here on this depth chart. Why, oh why, if you're saying that you have to be good in the trenches, do you feel like walking into this season that that's the best that you can put together on your defensive line? Now, I went over the numbers after the season was over. Fatorma Mulba graded out really well. So did Tyron Bradley. So I feel like that's why Jordan Leslie and this staff believe in both guys to be starting caliber players for West Virginia preseason. And Tyron Bradley might be the best defensive. He might be an unsung hero, leader of this defense that nobody's necessarily talking about right now. I really have high hopes for Tyron Bradley, and also I think Fatorma Mulba can surprise some people. But if this defensive line is going to be better at creating pressure like they did in the Duke's Mayo Bowl this year, I feel like you need another body there at nose tackle. You need another 300-pounder, somebody who can go in there and, but they've been developing Hammond Russell for 4 years. So is this finally time for has everything that you've invested in Hammond Russell to be a backup, trust in Fatorma Mulba, and then rotate in Hammond Russell? It's a long season, folks. That's why I get worried. Where, why do you need more receivers than you do defensive linemen who get pounded every single play and take on wear and tear over the course of a 12-game season? So, have high hopes for Martin, TJ Jackson. I think Eddie V can be just as good as last year. I'm curious about Redwood after his injury, but again, third-year player. Got to start showing something or going to the transfer portal. So would a scheme with a 3-4 defense help? Yes, it would help these guys on the defensive line. But no, we're not going that way. Instead, Ty French, not going to be the starting jack linebacker in a 3-4 base defense. Nope, he's the backup. He's the backup to Tyron Bradley, who, again, I also have extremely high hopes for and hope at this bandit position that Jordan Leslie just doesn't do what he did with Jared Bartlett and make him be essentially, an outside or weak side spy who, as the ball, gets snapped, he's just standing there like waiting for something to potentially come back the other way. And it's, 10 guys versus 11 offensively for the other team. Very, interesting. This is not what I was expecting between Mike linebacker and Will linebacker. Trey Lathan apparently going to be starting at Mike linebacker, which you would expect that player to potentially be, 230 to 260. Perfect fit for Josiah Trotter, but is Will linebacker not perfectly suited for Trey Lathan's skill set and how great he did at that position before he got injured against TCU? But Trey Lathan's going to be the middle linebacker, and Caden Beiser or Reed Carrico. So Reed Carrico, who you would have thought a former 4-star recruit who goes to Ohio State coming in, is not considered a true, if it's not a position battle between Carrico and either Trotter or Lathan in this case at middle linebacker, you're seeing him at best like a third middle linebacker. I mean, I don't know. That's something that maybe will play out in fall camp. I betcha. I bet he'll be an awesome special teams player as he was at Ohio State. But it just kind of waters down, I feel like, this transfer portal, class that what Neal Brown and co brought in. If Carrico isn't a guy who, going into fall camp, would be considered a starting linebacker. A little bit concerning to me. Although I believe in Lathan. I think he'll be an awesome, day one starter for this team. And then at will linebacker, Josiah Trotter or Ben Cutter. Again, I thought we would flip Lathan and Cutter here. Lathan and Trotter. I think Trotter is just a perfect fit for middle linebacker. I see him in the same vein, I feel like, as a Tony Fields or a Lee Koba. But the way that he performed, I feel like, in that spring game with that awesome interception and showing his athleticism, that he's already, I feel like, better in coverage than Lee Koba ever was. So maybe Will linebacker is the perfect fit for him. If you have Bradley, who's 250, 260 on one side, and you got Trotter, who's 250, 260 on the other side, and then Lathan's the guy in the middle, and maybe you're going to drop back in coverage a little bit more, maybe that's your way of being able to blitz from the outside ends more. But Jordan Leslie has to commit to it. He has to commit to rushing the passer with different players from multiple angles. Rushing a cornerback, rushing a safety, rushing a linebacker, never twice out of the same look and feel. I think that Tony Gibson really got good with that, and same with Jeff Castile. I think maybe the best performance ever out of a 3-3-5 defense against Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl. That's the model. That's what you have to do. Not just rush 3 and drop back 8. You got to create pressure on opposing quarterbacks. So, Bradley, Lathan, Trotter, Cutter. We'll see. I'm okay with that linebacking core. At cornerback, I think we all kind of understood that Garnet Hollis Jr. was going to be the number 1 corner. Can he be as good as Beanie Bishop? Time will tell. I don't necessarily know that. I don't think anybody does, but Neal Brown and Leslie have a lot of faith in him. At 2 is where I think we were all kind of wondering. Is Jacoby Spells going to be that guy, a third-year player who kind of burst onto the scene with that interception return for a touchdown against Virginia Tech in Blacksburg? Instead, we see Aiden Garnes getting the nod. Is that because of Spells' injury this past spring? Probably. So a lot of onus, I feel like, put here on Aiden Garnes to follow in the footsteps of Malachi Ruffin, who I feel like was one of the unsung heroes of the defense this past year. Really, I feel like blossomed in his last year. So they're going to try Dantes Fagan out. Also, TJ Crandall, who they brought over from Colorado State at corner. So that is going to be, I feel like, a fall camp decision. But expect Hollis and Garnes to probably come out of it week 1 against Penn State. So, more to talk about with them as the summer goes along. But keeping that in mind. At Spear, we had heard rumblings of this during the offseason that Aubrey Burks was going to get moved to Spear from the free safety. I don't know about it. That the Spear plays more like a linebacker potentially. And then Zay Jennings, while I'm extremely high on Zay Jennings, is a true freshman. So Raleigh Collins, where are you? Are you kind of on the outside looking in? This is your third year into the program. Has Zay Jennings now usurped Raleigh Collins? Where is his fit for this team? A little disappointed. I'm happy for Zay Jennings, but like a little bit disappointed there because I really thought this could be a year potentially for Raleigh Collins. So maybe, who knows? Maybe we'll see. Time will tell. At Cat, this blew my mind. It blew my mind because, again, we're still in the 3-3-5. Don't know why that is. But at Cat safety, Josiah Jackson or Kakara Tarnu, transfer from Jacksonville State, who, just had a cup of coffee in Morgantown, but we're going to trust him to be a starting defensive player, or Josiah Jackson, who's a redshirt freshman, and then Jacob Boyce, who's a true freshman. I don't know there. Is that smoke screen for Penn State? Because then at free safety, you have Anthony Wilson and Jaheim Joseph. Anthony Wilson, I feel like, fits more of the Spear, potentially. Although he's undersized, he's a hitter. He's a thumper. Third in the team in tackles. I like Aubrey Burks playing more of the Troy Polamalu type of free range in the outfield type of defensive back, to then move Wilson then to Spear and then figure out. I thought Jaheim Joseph, and that's what Lindy's has here when I was reading through the depth chart, has Jaheim Joseph as one of the starting safeties. But no, apparently he's going to back up Wilson. So I think this is just for Shadon Brown, defensive backs coach, to figure out, what are you going to do? You have all of these different defensive backs to play around with. Who are your best five week one against Penn State? And how many of them are going to be more coverage guys? And how many are you going to be more aggressive with to rush the passer? Because some of these guys are going to have to do that. You're going to have to do that out of this 3-3-5 scheme. Got to be multiple. To finish this off, because I know I'm rounding out on an hour, understand about Michael Hayes at kicker, Ollie Straw at punter. The returners was somewhere I talked about in the spring as well. Hudson Clement and Preston Fox being your two kick returners. I would have thought it'd be Jaheim White and Rodney Gallagher. That's just me. And punt returner, I figured Fox would get the nod. Trustworthy, doesn't fumble unless Andrew Wilson-Lamp is kamikazing him. So old reliable there. Going into the BYU game, he was top 10 in the country in yards per return average. And just some plays here and there kind of dropped him out of it. So if he can catch punts, predominantly out of fair catches, or when he does get a chance to return, can get 10 yards, that's fantastic. That's all you really ask for out of college football punt returners, I feel like. And that's all conservative Neal Brown wants. But Rodney Gallagher, does he have that playmaker special ability into the open field? I'd love to see him there. I'd love to see Rodney Gallagher, and I feel like for his development and his what's the word? Not momentum, but getting involved more on special teams to then use that to getting involved more offensively, work his way into the 3-4 deep at wide receiver. That's where I would like to see Rodney Gallagher at that punt return. So, very interesting. What are your thoughts, Mountaineer Nation, on this depth chart? Going into fall camp, am I over-exaggerating? Do I need to pump the brakes, Carson? You're being a little too harsh. Again, I don't do this not as, to demean or whatever West Virginia in any sort of way. I'm just saying, if a lot of fans have this year circled. It's now year 6 for Neal Brown. Texas and Oklahoma are no longer a part of this conference. The crab pot to the top of Mount Everest, now that the Big 12, now including Utah, now including Arizona, and K-State and Oklahoma State, I talked about this past fall. If West Virginia wants to be taken seriously in the national conversation, up their recruiting rankings, get talked about more by the national media, and so on and so forth. You have to put the best players out on the field as humanly possible, recruit them and get them out on the field, and then and go win games. Starting it off week 1 with Penn State, you're going to have 5 teams to knock off out of this schedule that are preseason national top 25. And UCF's not a bad team, and you're still playing your arch rival in Pitt on the road. I know Pitt was a terrible 3-9 team last year, but how many times have we talked about Pitt being a terrible, terrible team, and then, West Virginia has to have a rock fight with the Panthers up in Heinz Field. So, a lot I've thrown out at you today. How'd you take in Big 12 Media Days? What were your thoughts? What were your thoughts on this depth chart? Is West Virginia being overlooked? Is that okay if they're being overlooked? Because as I've said 1,000 times, West Virginia is a better David than they are as a Goliath as a program. So thanks for tuning in. Going to have a lot for you to talk about over the course of this next month as we gear up. Fall camp starting up in 3 weeks, I think, to the day. Then, before you know it, August 31st will be here against Penn State. So kicking it off here with Big 12 Media Days for the 2024 season. Love to have you a subscriber. Join my channel. And tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog that I do this each and every week and have a lot of fun doing it. And thanks for tuning in. Hail West Virginia. Let's go.